Welcome back, everybody, to Ravenstar's Witching Hour. I'm your host, Solaris BlueRaven. My wonderful guest tonight is Dan Willis. Dan, before we were hitting the break there, we were talking a little bit about, I guess, Tom DeLonge and some other things we were wanting to address. You want to continue on?
Oh, sure. Yeah. Let's see. We're on the witching hour here. It was going into the dark side of things. Uh,
Yep, truly, the cauldron is being stirred. Go ahead.
Well, let's do a little background here before we go into the dark side. And let's say there's some indications for that. Let's say back in 1967, Lyndon B. Johnson, he hit the roof when he found out the report from Iron Mountain got leaked out, and he suppressed it for all time. And if you dig into that report, essentially what that report said that we needed to have continual enemies. And we need to have perpetual war, and we need to have different types of false flag. And one of the things it mentioned was the contriving of a threat from outer space, and they talked about that they had some knowledge of, it's almost like somebody on the inside, like maybe Nazis or something, had this idea of creating this threat from outer space. This is 1967. By the time Werner von Braun died in 1977, he let on that he was revealed to him, this plan that, first was going to be the Soviets would be the first deception that they planned. And it turns out that that was a deception because they were lying to Truman, both Allen Dulles and General Donovan, who was in charge of the OSS, about the Soviet estimates. And so we build up trillions of dollars, for the whole Cold War thing. And a lot of that money got funneled into these operations. And, then, I forget all the sequence. And we have terrorists. I wonder what that could be. And then in the future, they're going to be nations, third world nations of concern, well, maybe think about the little fat boy over there. And then the final card would be the extraterrestrial threat, but all of it would be a lie and all of it would be hoaxed.
Correct.
And so, and they had the technology, obviously, in order to hoax the extraterrestrial threat. So the other possibility, and this is something right after this mainstream media blitz on the UFO, Dr. Greer sent out a message saying that he believes this is like a possible precursor to the hoaxed alien invasion thing. And it's kind of interesting. There's in the UFO community, there's this mix. Some of the researchers. And I don't know how they, I had some ET experiences, and they all been, as far as I know, they've been benevolent. But I can't say for sure. I don't know them all. I don't have any inside resource to be able to say, oh, all of them are benevolent, or all of them are evil, or there's a complete mix of them, just like there is here on Earth, where there's deranged people and there's very benevolent people.
Right. What about the reverse engineered extraterrestrial, which is something they've been cloning and working on, in my opinion, anyway? You have the reverse engineered craft and technology that we know that was done prior to World War II, and also I think even earlier than that. But literally, you're dealing with cloning and also anything they've extracted from any form of extraterrestrial, whether it's a real life form or even a piece of material, is going to be cloned or reverse engineered, and that would include a version of an extraterrestrial, which, in my opinion, I think they've been creating. I don't know what your sense is, but that really just, to me, that I think that's what you're talking about when you say they're hostile. I would say it's probably the reverse engineered extraterrestrial that mankind has been working on in the underground versus an off-world species. That's just my take. Another thing I wanted to just make a point on really, really quick was the fact that our whole environment is a weaponized environment right now. We've got the ionosphere that literally is weaponized to a point where when you send signals out, everything bounces back onto us, which means we can't get out. We can't get a signal out unless you're part of the corporatized space program. Does that make sense to you at all?
Well, you can still get a signal out through the ionosphere, but...
you think so?
Yeah, being a ham radio operator, radio operators, they use the ionosphere to bounce the signal around to get from one continent to the other.
Right, but here, but not off planet. I'm talking off planet, like way off planet.
It's not such a reflective shield that most of the energy actually goes out into space, and only a small portion of that radiation bounces back into Earth off the ionosphere, which is ionized and acts as kind of like a little bit of a reflector.
Mm-hmm. Okay, but I wanted to make that clear because it was just the way I've been seeing things lately is that it feels like it's very, very weaponized insofar as not being able to get an outside signal outside where we are, with their perimeters. It's almost like they've created a boundary and a fence that we can't get anything out beyond that. And that's why I was asking you. So I'm glad you actually, thanks for the clarity on that one. I still think they're running interference though, but go ahead.
Well, the beryllium and stuff is highly reflective, on the chemtrails that they've been spraying on us, and with the aluminum. It works for they use it for these simulations. When you have this highly reflective, they have this bouncing and create 3D models of cities and things, and you can see, there's different. They got different programs, and the whole chemtrail thing was the brainchild of Edward Tiller, which was part of the new MJ12 group that was controlled by Alan Dulles. But anyway, going back to there's a lot of indications. A lot of people say, oh, there's no predatory races out there. Well, you have a lot of different witnesses. You've got, you have William Tompkins, who's well documented, talking about the reptilians. My friend Naira Isley, she was taken on board, and she saw a reptilian on board the craft where she was sexually abused, and then she was used for doing menial labor and stuff on the moon. And then you have Phil Snyder, who was attacked by a reptilian, where they blew off his fingers and hit him in the chest, and then he was suicided for coming out. It was kind of interesting that Phil Snyder, his father, was one of the paperclip boys. So these people are like brought into the family to keep this going. And then Corey Good's still on the questionable list, because he doesn't have the certain papers and documents. So a lot of people on different sides of the fence with him. So I don't really bring that up. But you have these different, you have Randy Kramer also, these different secret space program witnesses that, it's hard to document stuff like that, that you're going in a 20-year back program and whatnot. But
even some of the visuals, though, I can interject just a second here, but some of the things you're talking about, even when people see extraterrestrials or they see a reptile, that could be a modulation of a wave and a frequency with psychotronics and transmission and signal messing with the brain of the target. That's not necessarily an extraterrestrial. It could be a program. I'm not saying it is. I'm just saying that's the potential. So that's something to look at as well. That is it live or Memorex? In other words, is it a real extraterrestrial or is it a projection and something that they've created through the array system itself? So something to look at.
Well, according to the Navy spies that were over in Nazi Germany, they were aware of the reptilian group that was giving Nazi Germany the technologies. But I wasn't there. I haven't seen it firsthand. So, but there's
something that you made, and I don't want to go. What's really interesting, you touched on earlier, was the Nazis did the flyover in D.C. to intimidate Truman, I think you mentioned. Now, that is interesting because a lot of people assume that particular flyby was an off-world species. They didn't assume it was the Nazis or or reverse engineered. Now, I've always had a hit on that insofar as even when I first heard about all this stuff, I always felt like some of that technology was ours. In other words, reverse engineered versus an off-world. And that's interesting that you mentioned that. How did you come to the conclusion that was reverse engineered from them?
Oh, this is Tompkins and Good, the secret space program. People have indicated that they were basically intimidating Truman. There's a lot of other circumstantial evidence that all points to that. When you look at all the evidence and, and there's split between the, it's like there's a war going on inside, right. like back when we were watching Star Trek and the Outer Limits and stuff like that, all that came from Admiral Leslie Stevens, who was working with, Admiral Rico Boda, who was in charge of this Nazi spy program that was embedded into Nazi Germany. And his son, Leslie Stevens, was in Office Naval Intelligence. And anyway, they were providing the scripts. Notice that it wasn't an Air Force general that was running the Enterprise. It was Admiral James T. Kirk. So it was a Navy space program that they were putting out.
Right.
And it's kind of interesting, Disney and the 33rd degree Freemasons, and Disney along with von Braun is selling the public on rocket propulsion to the moon and everything, where von Braun, his mentor, Professor Hermann Oberth, was saying, we had help from people from other worlds, where they had developed torsion physics back in the 30s, and they knew full well that rocket propulsion was obsolete, but they wanted to keep us using, and when I was involved in, for 10 years meeting with scientists and inventors who were receiving these national security orders that came out of the patent office of a secret system that the national security apparatus set up called the Sensitive Application Warning System. One of the things that if anybody comes up with an anti-gravity solution, not to mention, free energy and things that seem to violate the known laws of physics and a whole list of other things that basically keep us using nuclear, oil, and coal, which they've issued, well over 5,000 of these gag orders, these national security orders to inventors and scientists. They've basically been, keeping, surface dwellers on this planet, technological, and the corporations that are in charge of, nuclear and oil and coal and everything like that. It's a huge multi-trillion-dollar industry. They keep that going while they have this super advanced technologies in all areas of science, including genetics and mind control, like you mentioned, that can create, programmed life forms that if we were to see one and come down with one of these ships, everybody would swear, "Oh, this is from not of this world. This is these are extraterrestrials,"
Right. Yeah. Keep them ignorant and dumbed down and switched off. And when you have technology, it'll look like something of a god. It's the new god syndrome. What's interesting, you also mentioned, and this rings a bell also, is the nukes being remotely shut down. We had those issues. I think you mentioned, was it Captain Salas that had the nukes that were remotely shut down? Or basically there was something there intimidating. Was that something else? Was that connected to the German space program as well versus off-world?
No. When he was down 60 feet down in the command capsule and his guards were screaming with weapons drawn at a glowing red UFO, which rapidly shut down all of his, I think he had 10 nuclear-tipped ICBMs, and they all went. He said they could have put a beam down there and destroyed the whole place, but all they did was turn off his nukes. And then, when he was on CNN with Larry King way back when, they had this goofball debunker with a little bow tie saying, "Oh, well, they probably had trouble with their air conditioning systems." When each one of these missiles have triple redundancy systems on them, it's it's funny. They always give the debunker a little bit for the people who have a hard time with comprehending that such an event could happen, and it gives them kind of like a psychological out. Oh yeah, that's probably what it was, type of thing.
Yeah, well, what's interesting is that I'm pretty sure now we have the remote capabilities to disable any type of a launch or potential launch from a nuke, and that's why I was curious insofar as obviously it was an off-world or something that was not from here. So that's interesting. That's interesting right there. I'm trying to put some of these pieces together. What's ours, what's not ours, that sort of thing.
It's interesting that, the Vaticans, you have all the secret societies, you have the Freemasons, Knights of Malta, you've got the Skull and Bones, with the Bushes, even Heinrich Himmler was a Knight of Malta, along with William Casey, the CIA director, says we'll know our disinformation plan is complete when everything the public knows is false. You have way back in 1952, you have the Vatican coming in where the Catholic Church is wanting containment of the UFO issue, which they said they had back in the late 40s, which is interesting. And then in 1954, when Eisenhower had the contact, they had the first one was with Cardinal Francis Spellman, and then later it was Cardinal Francis McIntyre, who broke his secrecy oath and went straight to the Pope and spilled the beans. And in 2008, the Vatican came out with saying, "Oh, the extraterrestrials are brother. They were not born of original sin, therefore they must be benevolent." And and so it almost smells like a little bit like there is definitely all the documents, the secret, highly classified documents that are showing the Vatican's involvement with this whole issue. Even the WikiLeaks email with to John Podesta from astronaut Edgar Mitchell, talking about the Vatican's awareness of the extraterrestrial intelligence and that they will not tolerate, a hostile, situation. When you look at that, it's almost as though the Vatican is positioning itself for another place in power to bring in like a new religion that these extraterrestrials would be bringing in. This is probably all tied into the limited disclosure that that DeLong has, whether he's being played or whether he is conscious of it or not, for the information that they're giving him, that this is feeding in that direction.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And also with the Vatican and the CIA and the Jesuits mainly, which are kind of like CIA, I guess you can call them. But literally, their whole belief system, it morphs, depending on what's popular. In my opinion, it seems like, I don't know what they think they're representing at this point in the continuum, but it seems to me like since they've had so much access and they did work very, very closely, correct me if I'm wrong, with the Nazis, to a point where they have inside information, in my opinion, to exotic technologies and information. That includes mind control, because as we know, Germans were notorious for that when the Nazis were notorious for that sort of thing. So I'm once again dovetailing it back into electronic mind control, psychotronic mind control. And I think just for my own, the way I'm seeing things right now, is that the new God that they're going to roll out is going to be the artificial intelligence God. I think that's going to be what they're going to try to deploy and pull off. And they might be able to do it. So that's just me, take it for what it's worth. But go ahead.
Well, I'm sure they're utilizing artificial intelligence up there in Bluffdale, Utah, with those quantum computers that are recording this conversation.
Well,
analyzing
bugs over there. Hey, I've been analyzed inside and out. It doesn't matter to me. So, yeah, I've had. Go ahead.
What I'm saying is that as been revealed, from Snowden documents, that even when your phone is turned off, they can turn on the all the features on it and monitor you, and they have backdoors and all sorts of different hardware, and not to mention every single communication. And originally the CIA initially funded Google and initially funded Facebook, which is volunteering all this information about ourselves. So with the processing capability, they could actually pretty much have an idea of what the entire population, I know it's hard to even wrap your head around it, but they'd be able to see what their psyops are what kind of response the public is having to these
things.
They
can read the algorithms, there's no doubt, but also there's a remote brain hacking. I mean, nowadays you can actually brain hack a target. You can brain hack. I've been there. I know how it works. So you can literally interface with a person live feed real time and have a sci-spy right there wandering around with you with the operators, controllers, handlers, and everything else. I mean, that's the new technology, which isn't really so new. But when people look at all these sci-spy technologies that are just regular machines, now we have the body, which is a bioelectric field, which is hackable, and it has been hacked. And I know because I went through this. So you're also talking about that's the other beast on the block. block as well. So it's a very interesting world we live in, with a lot of different types of things happening simultaneously. I just want the good guys to prevail and win, and the guys who are deploying this really need to be held accountable. I think now's the time. You were talking about wars going on, and I'm a firm believer that the breakaway society has left, that there's a huge group of beings that are way, way gone, and so gone off planet and beyond that they won't even be recognizable as once humans at this point in the continuum. That's just what I see. And what I see here is an afterbirth of a civilization that is literally being, like you said, retarded into a false matrix to a point where they can't escape unless we break these things down. We've got to pull these things out, and we've got to prosecute and get these people held accountable, or we're never going to get out of here. None of us. So,
well, I think there's some very, I'm seeing some very encouraging things, Solaris.
That's great.
I'm seeing some very encouraging
because
things
I'm more on the
going
dark
on.
side, and so far as what I've seen.
Yeah. We went into the dark side, but onto the bright side. It's like a lot of people there's a global awakening happening, and a lot of the people that they've been using, they realize that they're using, and they're not going along with this, and they want to bring these people down. There's a whole the alliance that's working together to bring down this cabal is working pretty diligently. I think they caught them off guard. And although they're quite resourceful and they have huge amounts of money, still they're only as what was it? Obi-Wan said to Darth Vader, "You're only a master of evil." So
Right.
they.
Let me ask you another thing. What about the privatization of space? What is your take on monopoly wars in space? It's my opinion that corporations and privatized individuals who are privatizing space, I think they're trying to actually create a grid to a point where they don't want anybody traversing the highways of the multiverse of the universe or our solar system. Do you feel anything about that? What's your take on that?
Well, it's kind of interesting, with Elon Musk. Remember all the explosions that are happening, the rockets that were going on, I don't know.
He just had a launch yesterday, or SpaceX did okay.
People,
yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, a lot of people saw that, someone thought it was UFOs. But,
I saw that. I couldn't believe it. Yeah, it was plain and simple that it was obviously a launch. So I don't know why they ran it. Yeah, it's funny. But go ahead.
They realized, China has got their space program going, and you have all this. They were wanting to keep, ever since we went to the moon, and been warned off. They're wanting to keep everybody not from going into space, but it's they need to control that. So there's been efforts in order to keep the controls so that just the Cabal controls that frontier of the space.
Well, it seems like the space wars are on, and of course, I think I heard Trump. I didn't hear him Trump, but I heard an article or saw an article pertaining to something about him wanting to go back to the moon and the illusion of, and I think that will be very interesting. See what's there if they decide to do that. So, with their traditional.
There's also that he might be releasing some of these national security orders with all these, technologies, so that we can rip out all of these stupid wires running all over the place. Distributing power that's EMP and CME susceptible. That would put us back to the Stone Age if we had a situation like that, and create billions of jobs with all these little energy devices, run every home and business on, and that we could have cars, we could have a transitional technologies easily convert them to run on water. The technology's just been suppressed. Even have anti-gravity. All this stuff actually came out in the late 50s, but it all got suppressed. It was like talking about the G machines, and it was talking about anti-gravity, and they were planning on coming out with it. And there's a lot of indication, and all of a sudden it went totally quiet, and the whole thing shut down. And while I think it was the Nazi infiltration that happened, and the control that happened, that Eisenhower lost back in 1955, that put a suppression on. We could have had in the 50s, people were visualizing, in the year 2000 and beyond, people would have like little George Jetson, anti-gravity vehicles, and we have free energy, and everybody would be living an incredible lifestyle. But instead, we've had primitive, dangerous technology shoved down our throat, and everybody's been enslaved in order to keep this whole system going. I mean, there could have been a whole different world could have existed if that cabal didn't infiltrate and take over from the inside.
Yeah, well, you know what it sounds like? It reminds me of that movie Total Recall, but literally it's about changing the frequency. If we would just change the frequency band entirely across the globe, even on a holographic level, I think that we could shift this world into a higher overtone of what we're supposed to be doing here. And I think the world would change overnight. But you're right, we have to get rid of all these dysfunctional programs that are running, which some of them are technological. We've got to get rid of the dirty electricity and things that don't work anymore. They're more like, dark age technologies, even though they seem advanced. So, yeah, I agree. I think the free energy is the way to go, and I think we could do it if we really wanted to, but we have to step it up. And then civilization has to step up consciousness. We can't just live in the world of, the third world mentality and the hostility and the violence has to stop. It has to cease. So, and I think part of that is a side effect due to the toxicity of the world we live in.
Yeah, well, consciousness is key behind all of this. And when I was working with Marcel Vogel with the Delaware camera, which would take a drop of blood of somebody, and you could take a photograph. They could be on the other part of the planet, and you could tune into them and make an image, showing absolutely that the reality that we are in is holographic. Now, you take that technology that was back in the 1950s, that was patented and everything, and that could move forwards and backwards in the time also. I forgot to mention that. You can imagine trillions of dollars with some of the most brilliant minds in these secret operations that have taken that, so that that in those sciences they were able to, it's like very primitive level of understanding that each person has like an individual frequency that somehow is connected with our DNA. So it's very unique. So you can tune into a specific individual. They've mapped out the brain. They mapped out all the emotions, all the different feelings and thoughts and stuff like that. You wonder, that they can target an individual. Now, I know you're aware that they can do this, and put thoughts in their heads. You see some of these crazy crimes that are happening, people coming out of nowhere, and a lot of them, commit suicide, before taken in. Yep. It's almost like the program is self-destruct after you do your mission.
Yeah, it's a suicide program. Yeah, for sure. Well, it's the electronic telepathy or synthetic telepathy, artificial telepathy, however you want to word it. Literally, it's a transmission and signal interface. And with your background, you probably are familiar with some of the technologies they used to deploy, but they've gotten really smooth with it. And now it's easy to remotely brain hack a target. It's so easy, it's not even funny. And when you're torturing somebody 24 hours a day and giving them commands and they don't comply, you torture them even further until they do comply or the person expires. I know these programs are violent as all hell. And it surprises me that this is not being addressed in D.C. We're talking about, yes, disclosure. Okay, I'm good with disclosure. Let's disclose the covert harassment, psychotronic weapons, the misuse of artificial telepathy, and the people, and the handlers, and the controllers, and the operators, and perpetrators that are out there stalking people and destroying lives. I think that this is, I've been on the front lines for this, and I get very fired up because I understand how severe this is. This is a warfare. This is a war crime program, and it really needs to be looked at, and it's being deployed by people in high-profile areas in entertainment, music industry. Now we're getting looked at, they're getting looked at insofar as the people over there in California with Hollywood. You've seen kind of the stuff kind of floating around out there, but it goes way deeper than what they're talking about, way deeper than the little sexual harassment here and there. It goes way deep, and it needs to be exposed. It really does. So.
Oh, that's the beginning level. Yeah, you're talking about the full disclosure. That's what it involves. All this, this manipulation and all the psychotronic weapons and all this stuff. And the chemtrailing and the genetically modified, our food being weaponized against us, and not to mention fluoride, and just on and on and on and on. All this stuff has to stop.
It does. Well, there's one thing. I understand military. I understand battlefield. I get that. And I understand that you use and deploy this type of a warfare program in the battlefield. I understand. I knew people in the Middle East who were over there deploying weird stuff to, mess with people's heads. I get it, okay? But I understand that when you're a civilian, you live in your own country, you should not be harassed and you should not be inducted into covert programs against your will. And I think this is, like I said, it needs to be addressed. And I know that you've been doing a fabulous job disclosing. I mean, I appreciate everything you've been doing for the many, many years you've been out there, because you really have. And I want to thank you, because I know we're getting close on time. It's about a half an hour here, but I didn't get to a question. And I wanted to ask you real quick. This was a question in chat. Ask Dan if he has meant, this was earlier on when you were talking, but he wants to know about the communists and if they were infiltrating the American schools. I'm rewording it a little bit, but I'm pretty sure that was the case back then. You talk about the early German programs and the indoctrination programming.
I mean, with the communists, I'm not sure I understand.
Well,
the question.
I think his wording is, ask Dan if he had meant that communists came more into American schools. So he's wondering if communism was introduced in the American schools back in the day.
No, more the Rockefellers is what got into it. And,
Okay.
the Rockefellers is what got into, completely controlling the education. Mm-hmm. And in fact, it was in 1957, they took out of all the major universities, about the powers of human consciousness. One of the things they're afraid of, through their controls through Hollywood, which, you see all this continually hurt and kill human programming going on, and, all the, apocalyptic things. They understand that the collective mind, through many millions of minds that see these things, are, besides, just keeping us in a state of fear, because we're more controlled that way. We don't have, when we're in a state of fear, you're not connected with your higher aspect. And so they want to make sure that we don't become aware of the incredible power each one of us has to what we think and what we believe, because we're connected to this. We're connected to this collective mind that we're all share, and they know that they can kindle into manifestation enough minds thinking and seeing things in a certain way. And there's a huge amount of psychological preparation that goes through movies and Hollywood and everything like that works, in alignment with the Cabal's agenda, as well as, all our news media, So, I do these shows with you, Solaris, just because we need to keep seeding the collective. The thing is that the truth has this power that resonates in everybody, but the lie doesn't do that. So you have this incredible advantage over the liars, because the truth keeps on popping up like a whack-a-mole, type of thing.
That's why I still do it. Yeah, that's why I'm still out here, because I can't stand the idea of people sweeping information under the carpet or having poster boys like what we described earlier, or what I described earlier. Is just, just to basically do damage control against truth. I'm really sick and tired of it, and that's one of the reasons I'm on air. But another thing I was going to ask you about Roswell. Now, Roswell and what happened over there, was that something connected to reverse engineer technology with the Germans?
The witnesses experienced, the bodies with the large heads, and they all looked, according to Colonel Corso, who witnessed them, they all looked like they were cloned. And it's kind of interesting. Paola Harris, who did a number of interviews with them, she's believing all the races are benevolent, like Dr. Greer and things, but Colonel Corso himself said that this wasn't somebody that came for salvation of mankind or anything. They were like these little
robots, or no?
Yeah, kind of like little robots, that were specially built. So yeah, Roswell, got shipped over to Wright-Patterson, and then, it went on to S4 after that.
Sounds like drones. It's interesting also, we were talking a little bit about the, national security and the threat, what constitutes a threat to national security. And not only is it just the violence of the world insofar as, I don't know, terrorism or something like that, but what I look at is the alien intelligence within, which is really about our soul spirit evolution. You touched on this a little bit with the higher self over soul superconscious connection, which means when we transcend out of the false matrix, we become these immortal kind of multidimensional beings, which are very galactic. And I think that is a threat to national security to a point where they have to maintain control over the behavioral patterns and what I would say almost like behavior modification, and they'll stop at nothing to do that, whether it's through something through mainstream media, movies, industry, whatever it is, even technology. So that's something to look at. But I think that we are the threat. We have become the threat, not you necessarily, but I think that those of us who have ascended out of the well are a threat because of that alien intelligence within, which is really our soul spirit. It's not from here. It comes from the stars.
Isn't it clever they used national security? It was the National Security Act 1947, which Truman regretted doing, especially after 1 month after JFK was assassinated. He said, CIA doesn't have to account to anybody. They're running on their own, doing their own things. They use everything, you can't know about that because it's for the good of national security. So they use this national security thing in order to hide all their secret operations, and each one of us that we're in the military, each of us have given a sworn oath to protect the Constitution against enemies, foreign and domestic. And from all indications, if anybody is doing their homework, we have a domestic infiltrated enemy.
Yes,
so
correct. Yeah. And it's really sad. Well, go ahead.
You're upholding your oath, by the way. All you military people listening out there, you're upholding your oath. To expose this, and right. For a constitutional republic that Eisenhower, said, only an alert, knowledgeable citizenry, and you won't get your knowledge watching CNN because it's been infiltrated.
Yeah, and it seems to me like even back in the day when you were dealing with them, it seems like they've always been that. It's never been a point where they weren't bought and sold. They were always propaganda oriented.
Well, yeah, it goes way back. The Cabal and the interest of this group, it goes back to 1917 when Rockefeller, J.P. Morgan, and Warburg, the one that got us into the Federal Reserve, bought all the major newspapers and controlled the perception that way. So, yeah, it goes back a ways. Even going back to Washington's cabinet, where you had Alexander Hamilton was basically Rothschild's boy that came in and got us on a central bank and got going that way. So there's always been the people with big money seem to be very tied in with the agenda of this cabal. They seem to work together. In the show I just did with Jay Widener, talking about, it's kind of interesting that you have, Jewish people controlling a lot of Hollywood, as you know, and then you have Nazi infiltration. Well, how do the Nazis and Jews work together? It turns out it's
Soros?
Much more involved,
right?
Working with all that. So
yeah. It's very interesting. Well, there's always an agenda, but I think what it boils down to is good versus evil. What are the ethics of each person while they're here on the timeline? What are they willing to do? I always say, as I said before, you can do whatever you want, but not at my expense and suffering. But what I'm seeing here is that people are suffering in a huge way due to the negligence and the misuse and the conduct of things that are going on that have been going on for a very long time, whether it's through deception, programming, technology, or whatever. So we do need to clear the air here. We do need to make sure that we disclose what we can. And I, like I said, I appreciate everything you do with the disclosure. I think that it's phenomenal that you've been doing what you're doing. And I love your website. I've touched on this before when you've been on the show, but I encourage the listeners and anybody in chat to go into your website and look through all of the data and the documentation that you've spent. How many years doing that? Because I can't imagine. How many years have you been working on that website?
Oh, well, it started because of that media company in Hollywood wanted me to write an article on it. And so I started collecting authenticated, top secret documents and witness testimonies. And I started in 2014, not that long ago, and I keep adding to it. And it's
fantastic.
thewebmatrix.net. And, it's just basically my online notepad. I'm just sharing with others with references and links and everything. And it definitely paints a picture that the whole world we thought is very different,
Yes, and we're not in Kansas at all. We're not even on the same planet. Yes, it's definitely very, very different. Well, they always say the Nazis won the war. The Germans lost, but the Nazis won, and I kind of believe that in a sense because of what even with the situation with Hitler, and I've talked about this before on my show, but the whole idea behind it, I even mentioned this last night on my show, hyperspace, but the whole idea of what happened to all of the personnel that went to Antarctica for the New Berlin, where did they go? Did they die there? Did Hitler eventually die there? Did they go off planet? Was there a jump point out there? Do you ever think about things like that?
Well, there was a huge amount of, I think it was like 10,000 Antarctic settlement women that got sent down to, it was like 2,500 SS troops down there, 4 girls to every guy, and they were probably busy making babies down there, and there's probably a couple of generations, and they're still working away down there, and there's a lot of crimes against humanity going on down there, and from what I understand, probably on Mars as well, and all these
they're off planet. Yeah, go ahead.
All these deep underground bases, you have to wonder how many slave operations work for the bottom line for corporations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And all the missing people. And so, if we were to expose everything, I think there'd be some pretty dark stuff, somebody at a party, groping somebody's tit in Hollywood is one thing, but, satanic child sacrifices is another, so.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And violating people internally and externally with a type of a warfare that literally tries to disrupt and destroy the DNA and the spirit within. That's soul torturing. So, yeah, they do insidious things, and I think that has a lot to do with their whatever you want to call satanic group or whatever they're into. I think they're very insidious. These people are extremely evil from what I've experienced just from the technology I was subjected to. I think they can be very, very evil. So, yeah, they do need to be stopped. There's no doubt about it. And that's why I always look at Antarctica, because I've always drawn to Antarctica. And, of course, we've heard a lot of stories about people going out there and a lot of privilege in the illusion of going out there and obviously observing something. But I have to say to myself, I get the sense that the initial Germans, the Nazis that went out there with their own groups actually left this world. I think they're gone. I think they went off planet. I don't think they died.
That's what Tompkins is saying.
I believe that.
Basically, they joined forces with the Draco Federation, and they're out conquering other worlds.
I really believe that intuitively speaking. I don't know why, but I've always kind of felt that and always thought it. So it's not about mind control. It's just about there's something about that. You just kind of know. I can't explain it, but
and according to Tompkins, we've been under reptilian control on this management for like 6,000 years. So they, but we have, the Nordic race is wanting to liberate us, working with the Navy, who have their 8 battle fleet cruisers out there in space, and they have very advanced technology. So, we have some good friends helping work, but it's all a big it's all a big psychological warfare from the moment we're born.
Yeah, it is. And the whole idea behind it, you know what, though? The fact that we understand the false matrix and we can see through it all is how we're going to get home. And that's what I've always said. You just stay close to your higher self, over soul, superconscious. You go into your divinity, and I always say merge with source, and you let go of of everything that's here that's non-productive insofar as the way they've been forcing people into these belief systems and these constructs. We just let them go. But what's interesting is that it's almost like even when we do that, there's some kind of a hostile force that's trying to prevent us from leaving the orbit. And that's what I was mentioning also. But I do believe we have allies. And like I said, we come from the stars. We go home to the stars. I don't believe all of us have incarnated here for the first time. I think we come from other planets. And I think that our soul spirit incarnates here and we have a certain experience or mission. And then we go home. So... But it's weird, I never expected this, and I never expected living on a world where everything has become such a distortion, like an Alice in Wonderland episode, or, you expect it to be kind of peaceful and kind of just everything's flowing. And I know you can make that because you're a very peaceful being. I know you and Rebecca both, but But when I see this world is like, why are people doing this? It's just like, gosh, why can't they just behave? So.
Well,
Yeah,
when
I
you
can go on
find
and
out
on.
the truth, it's just like one oh my God after another, and you
Yeah.
find out what's actually been going on, and I think, I was in the military. Knew the military was aware of these extraterrestrial or whatever who knows, they could have been Nazi craft on the bottom of the ocean with a base or something. Who knows? This was 1969 that I received that report. And then I've seen them fly 100 feet over my head. So I've seen them. And then, I went to Washington. I was naive in 2001, didn't realize, the control mechanism in place on this whole thing. And, and then it wasn't until 2014 that, only because I would still be naive and start not really understanding what is actually going on unless I had to start researching. And I think about the average person out there just trying to deal with living on this planet, trying to make a living, pay the rent, just they don't have time to. And then what's happening on the alternative media is they're saturating with fake news. They can put out just to muddy the water, so people just don't know what to believe. They have all kinds of crazy stuff, I notice, putting it out there. So it makes it even more difficult to sort through and find out, what's been going on. There's a lot of truth and there's a lot of good researchers out there that have put out information, but there's a lot of muddied waters in the whole thing. So I almost, only the NSA knows for sure, but, what degree of the population is actually aware of this infiltration and psychological warfare that we've been under.
I can tell you that I'm saying about less than 10% are probably switched on, like us, and the rest are just oblivious. And I hate to say that, but I think that's the case. And that's why you can never go back. Once you learn and once you start uncovering stuff, it's like, I can't go back to my old life. I can't even try. I just can't. I can't be reassimilated. Sorry. And that's the whole idea. Once you see it, once you know it, and I think this goes for anybody who's been involved in even in covert technology, there's no going back. There's no blending in anymore. You can kind of waltz around and pretend, but this is ridiculous. We've all just got to come to terms with what's happened here and go to the higher levels.
Yeah, once you see the evidence and once you open that little Pandora's box, you can never close it. Your life has changed from then on. And you know what? It completely ruins. If you were a science fiction fan, it completely ruins science fiction, because then you see, that much greater things than what you see on science fiction have been going on. And then when we were watching things in the 1950s, Forbidden Planet and The Day the Earth Stood Still and all that stuff, the real thing was going on in the background, but they were seeding the population with these ideas and manipulating so that we have a different perception. They knew they could manipulate the whole masses. So it completely changes your world. It's like preaching to the choir, on Revolution Radio. We got a lot of savvy listeners, that
they're enjoying you in chat, by the way. Everybody is enjoying you. They always love you when you're on. So, yeah. No, they don't. They're very sharp over here, and the listeners are very switched on. There's no doubt about it. But yeah, you're right. It ruins it for everything. It's at the point where the beauty of the world, that's why I say appreciate life while you can and your loved ones, and just hold on to love and consciousness and spirit and who you are as a true individual being, because individuality is a big deal. The hive collective that they're trying to create is non-productive. What we are, we can work together, but we don't have to be one movement on the chessboard. And I think that's what they're trying to create through this indoctrination and artificial intelligence. It's no good. So it's a distraction from spirit.
I love what you said in the beginning of the very beginning of the show. Absolutely, it's really about the Matrix is really love, and these beings are a distortion of that Matrix, and that's why the only power in the universe is actually love. So people can do distortions, they can do fear, they can do horrible things, sure, but in the end, it always comes back to that.
I totally agree with that. Yeah. And I'm sure you've had that feeling of bliss and love, not only for your loved ones, but also for love and consciousness. I know what it's like to be in that bliss mode of being connected and being connected to whatever you call God, creator, source. It's a very peaceful, blissful feeling. It's unbelievable. I can't even describe it. And to be ripped away into their drama bubbles is just no good. So I think that's why we're forced into disclosing, it's just to say, hey, this is non, we can't work these programs anymore. We've got to get rid of them. They're no good. They don't function right. So, and I call them programs, what we've been subjected to. So,
yeah, and there's kind of like a righteous anger to the whole thing, because we could have a completely different world. There's so much needless suffering on this planet.
I agree.
Totally needless suffering. All these wars. I didn't have to go to Vietnam in combat action because of the false flag of the Gulf of Tonkin. All these soldiers over there in Afghanistan, and because of that all started because of the 9/11 false flag and all these things that have been radicalized against, and it just, the whole thing has all been manipulated. And
it has. It's one big orchestration. It's like a game board, and I'm not playing the game. I don't care if they pull me in or not. I don't like this program they're running. I don't like this facade they've created. It's non-productive. It's not connected to spirit or source, and it creates too much division. I don't think we needed to experience this. I know some people say, well, maybe we were supposed to all experience this. I'm not buying it. I'm really not. I think it's something that people are out of control. They're running rogue. They have access to sacred, or even sometimes sacred, but technology they shouldn't have access to, and they're misusing it. And even information. I mean, we've got intelligence communities out there that steal their data, as you well know. They never earned that information. They steal it on the internet, or they steal it through people's files, or they spy on people and get the data stream. I mean, they're not earning that. The intelligence community is not intelligent. They're stealing. Their whole data is compilation of other people's information. So
we've got good people. We got good people in the NSA, like Snowden and others. There's a lot of good signs that there is, a lot of white hats, a lot in the military. I think we have a lot of hope with our military, because the military is of a different mindset than the Cabal, and they're aware of these operations. And, it's like someday, I'm just looking forward to the day where the Marines come in and take over CNN.
I'd love to see that. I'd like to see them all arrested. I'd like to see these people arrested. The ones that I know are committing these war crimes too. Boy, I'd love to see them go down. I mean, I would just love that. I'd love to see them busted in Los Angeles and Canada and every place else. I know that there are names and identities of people out there that have access to technology. They're using it and they're misusing it. And it'd be nice to see.
There's indications that this whole, Russian investigation with Trump and everything's a smoke screen, and there's like thousands of indictments of all these illegal, immoral individuals and corruption that's been going on are all going to be taken down, and that would be what a glorious day. It's like the end of a Star Wars movie where everybody's like celebrating, like the Ewoks jumping up and down. And,
right. I love it. Well, that's when the world will really change for the better. When we do that, when we get rid of these things that are controlling and manipulating and shutting down and switching off our world into darkness, that's when the world will brighten itself up, I'm sure. So let's run the energy for that in 2018. May it be a wonderful year. And, I know we're almost out of time here. So
I'm hoping 2018 is going to be the year that the whole world is going to be turned around in a whole new direction. And all the deceptions and things get exposed, and the people that have been perpetuating this, are held accountable.
Yeah, it's called universal law. I know there's man's version of God's law and man's law here, but it's also his compilation of law is lawlessness. So we have to go by universal code, and universal code blows it all out. So I'd say let's roll with that. Yeah, but I must say it's always a pleasure. You're just a sweetheart. You and Rebecca both are such good, beautiful souls, and I've said it a billion times. I want to thank you for being here tonight. It's always a pleasure and an honor to talk to you and interview you at your knowledge base. So thank you, and I wish you a very, very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year, and all that good stuff. And if people want to reach you.
Thank you for your incredible service, doing these shows and getting that awareness out there. That's a big service to mankind.
Thank you. And thank you for putting up with my agitated space. Sometimes I get all worked up about the technology because I've been there, and it just leaves a a sore spot. But thank you very much. And thanks everybody for tuning in, everybody in chat. Stay tuned for Shiny Side Out with David Dungeon and Becky. Coming up next, to sell you on tonight from Down Under, as they always do with their fantastic show. Last week, I think they were talking about hypothesis. I don't know what they're talking about this week. We'll find out. Everybody, thank you again. Merry Christmas. Be safe out there. See you next week.
Good night.
Good night.
Radio at freedomslips.com, and we'll be right back after this message. Message to our listeners. Revolution Radio is you. Thanks to your continuous support and participation, Revolution Radio will embark to its 8th year. Yoo-hoo! Bigger and better than ever. You, the listeners, have made Revolution Radio what it is. The #1 commercial-free talk radio station on the web with nearly 24 hours of live programming, delivering directly to you the most cutting-edge information available. You, the listeners, have become some of our most popular radio hosts. You, the listeners, offer feedback that molds our programming to appeal to a worldwide audience. You, the listener, provide eyes on the ground, reporting about newsworthy events in your area, and you, the listener, are the lifeblood of this station. We love you, and thank you for being a treasured member of our Revolution Radio family. From all of us to all of you, have a happy and safe holiday season, and let's make this new year a success once again together. Thank you. Is your data safe? Do you have the necessary information to assist you in confidently living through just about any survival situation? Is survival and gardening, off-grid living, medical knowledge, or even natural or man-made EMPs on your list of personal concerns? Do you have your documents and your personal information in a safe place in your hands where you know where it is? Well, check out our preloaded EMP-proof thumb drive. Over 3 gigs of survival documents and how-tos, plus the USDA offline food preservation website, and much